welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Crystal. Okay, I just found a podcast. It's pretty new. It's called People Are the Worst. And it's fun because it's true crime, because I love true crime, but it's true crime always with a twist or like a drastic turn of events. And I've only listened to the first episode so far, but it definitely had a twist and a drastic turn of events.
Wow. So are these real events?
Yeah, they're real events.
Huh. I have written it down, made note, because I have listened to all of the favorites that I've had and need some more. So this is awesome material.
Yeah, that's great.
They say there's something about us that makes us want to listen to murder podcasts. I'm just not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And also I read something about wanting to listen to a murder podcast to fall asleep to, which is supposed to be terrible for our psyche. I do it occasionally. And my partner Max says, "What are you listening to?" I'm like, "Oh, it's fine." So anyway, so there are alternatives, and we'll be talking about something like that today, I believe. And so that sounds awesome.
Yeah. So we have a guest with us today, as usual. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, my name is Nicholas Bernhardt Zeman. I'm a professor and I'm an inventor of spiritual technology art apps.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. I saw also that you're an engineer.
Yes. Right now I do enterprise architecture for a bank. So I design finance systems, ways to pay money from place to place. So, and previous to this, I was a blockchain engineer. So I did a lot of things in digital identity and decentralized identity, a lot of software engineering, application engineering, and now architectural engineering.
Okay. And then are you allowed to say where you're a professor at?
Well, I was formerly a professor. I'm actually no longer. I was offered tenure, but I left to get into teaching yoga. So I was a professor at Northern Kentucky University. Okay. Now I'm working with Zion's Bancorp.
Okay, and you traveled somewhere to do your yoga, is that correct? To train for yoga?
Yeah, I lived in the Keys for a while. I did my yoga training, and that's when I developed this app and started kind of getting into the idea of sound healing and ancient technology, vibrational frequencies, cosmic frequencies, that kind of stuff I did when I was doing my yoga training. And I was down in Big Pine Key. And then I was in Croatia recently for a Kundalini yoga retreat, but it wasn't a training.
Okay. Well, I have a question. How does one become a yoga instructor after having been and continuing to be in engineering? Those are vastly different approaches to thought.
I started doing yoga because I was spending so much time behind a desk, and you're constantly like, your one hand's on the mouse and your shoulders are all out of sync. And a friend of mine said, "You have to do this yoga class. I mean, you've got to do this. You have to do it." And I was like, "Yoga, isn't that for pregnant women?" That's what that words out of my mouth were. I'm pretty sure that's for pregnant women, right? Because I had confused it with Lamaze, and this was 1998 when yoga was very new. I was living in San Diego. It was a very new thing, and I always thought of it as this like meditative practice or maybe Lamaze, and I didn't really know what it was. So I went to this Ashtanga yoga class, and I mean, 20 years later, I've been teaching for quite a while. I've been doing it, practicing pretty much since that one day, that one class, which kind of just blew my mind. The things that your body should be able to do that it wasn't able to do at the age of 25. I just got into it as a practitioner, and I practiced for quite a long time. And then, as you practice, you start deciding you want to teach. And the one time I decided to teach my sister, I just kept complaining that the yoga teachers were terrible. This yoga teacher is bad. And the reason is because I didn't realize the first yoga teacher I had was one of the first Ashtanga teachers in America, from the 70s. He was like the best. He's still considered the best American Ashtanga yoga teacher, probably ever. So I just happened to get the best right away. And then so my sister said, "Well, can you do better?" I was like, "Yeah, I can. I'm pretty sure I can." And that's how I got into it.
That's awesome.
I don't know if I'm doing a better job or not, but at least I decided that I couldn't say they were doing a bad job if I couldn't do better.
That's fair.
Yeah. And do you have a current ongoing yoga practice where you teach it on the regular where people can sign up, or how does that work?
I was, so I took a little time off. I was teaching at Centered City, which is down at 9th and 9th for a couple of years. And then I was just teaching way too much and working full time, and I wanted to do a little more snowboarding. So I decided not to teach there anymore. I was teaching at my house. We had like 5 or 6 people coming in for private yoga sessions. And since I just recently moved to Sandy, I haven't started a home practice yet, but I may be subbing somewhere up the street fairly soon. And we're working some stuff out at a place called Glitter Armada, which you guys may be familiar with, to do yoga there. Maybe like, I think now the plan is Tuesday night. So I'm working on it.
So tell us a little bit about these frequencies you were talking about.
Great. So a cosmic frequency, and you'll hear the word cosmic octave, cosmic harmony, and cosmic frequency a lot, probably from me. So you're going to hear that a lot. So I just want to define a cosmic frequency is a frequency that is synced mathematically to the movements of the planets in some form or fashion, or to some type of electromagnetic or planetary phenomenon. And something that would be other than the movements of the planets is the actual pulse of the Earth's magnetic field, which is what we call the Schumann resonance, which is about, it's like 14.2 hertz, something like that. So when we find a frequency that is naturally being emitted by a planet or the motion of a planet, then we can call it a cosmic frequency.
Okay.
And the reason why it's cosmic is because it's literally being generated by the movement of a, astronomical body.
So this seems like something similar. I'm not saying it's a direct relation, but it seems like something similar to like the Fibonacci sequence, something that is natural, that is tied to our bodies as human beings. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Fibonacci sequence in nature, as you can see, like if you look at an artichoke growth pattern or a nautilus growth pattern, it follows the Fibonacci sequence. And most of that is because it's following the natural flow of the Earth as it rotates around its own axis, as it rotates around the sun. Those are mathematical equations that are just playing into the growth pattern. So yeah, the Fibonacci sequence is a perfect mathematical representation of something that happens naturally.
But the Fibonacci sequence does not translate into a frequency necessarily, more of a pattern, because that's how I've kind of looked at it, as a pattern sequence. Is that?
Yeah, it could. And honestly, in my app, I'm using the Fibonacci sequence, the golden ratio, which is 1.618 or 0.618. I'm actually using that ratio to scale the change in the frequency up and down. And that gets like really densely into the weeds, but it doesn't necessarily translate into frequency. You could say, hey, 1.618 is what we call the golden ratio, which is, as you increase, that will create that Fibonacci scale. And you could certainly say, I'm going to start at 1 hertz and just go up that scale and build a sweep, but it can mathematically translate into a frequency. But a frequency is basically just one number, and that is how many times something goes back and forth in a certain second. So 1 hertz goes back and forth between one point and another over the course of 1 second.
So you brought the comment, you said sweep on your app. I've downloaded and been looking at it, and it talks about sweep, and I wasn't totally clear what that meant. Now that you brought it up, could you explain that? And then
sure. A sweep is when you go from one frequency to another one. So just in terms of like sound engineering, audio engineering, I say, okay, I'm going to start with 10 hertz, which is just at the lower range of human hearing. Is more like I think it's 19 is right when you can actually start to hear it. And I slowly move the kind of like, think about it as the volume, but in this case, it would be the frequency. I'm going to slowly move it up, or I'm going to slowly move it down, or I'm going to quickly move it up or down. So when you hear things like go, woo, these like weird things you hear, it kind of sounds like UFO noises from the 1950s movies. You're actually using one of these machines that just moves the frequency up and down. And that's what a whole synthesizer technology is based on. So sweep just moves it from one frequency to another frequency over a period of time. And that period of time can be short or long.
Oh, and that's why in your app you had like 30 seconds, or I could adjust the time that the sweep takes.
Yeah, in the app, the current version that you're looking at, the sweep is actually going from one chakra, one frequency to another one, and it's just saying I'm going to go up the chain. It's kind of not. I'm using it in 2 different ways. The sweep in the app is really not a sweep. It's just a movement from one place to another.
Oh, okay. So even though you're using the same word, it's a slightly different translation.
Yeah, the sweep in the app means I'm going to go from your root chakra to your crown chakra, and you get to choose how long it stays in each chakra, which in itself is a frequency.
Right. Okay. I understand. Thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome.
Let's take a step back, just because Andrea brought it up and you've you've mentioned it. Tell us a little bit about this app that you have. I believe it's called Audible Acupuncture. That's right.
Yeah. So the app is based. I built a machine. So let's take a step back. Why did I do any of this stuff? Like, what is it? Why did I do it? Why does it matter? And I didn't know any of this stuff. I was actually doing, and this goes back to yoga. So going back to yoga, go to a lot of yoga classes, and people chant. It's part of the Ashtanga practice. You do chanting, and Om is one of the chants that you'll probably hear a lot in a yoga class. And there's lots of different other chants, and every chant has different sounds and tones, right? You're singing a note, and everyone's singing differently. And being a musician, I just wanted to know, like, what is the sound of Om? Like, what's the right note? Because it's from ancient Vedic singing theory, musical theory. Somewhere someone has to say, like, this is it, this is the note, it's a G, it's a C. So I looked, and there was an absolute answer. It was 136.1 hertz, right? And that it is the 25th octave of the frequency of the earth as it rotates around the sun. So just reading that, I'm like, well, why is that? Like, who decided that? And if you decided this in 10,000 BC, how did you know that this is the exact same frequency? So this kind of started unraveling a thread. Like, why is this thing? So I started looking, and there's a book called The Cosmic Octave by Hans Kusto, in 1970s German astrophysicist, also very spiritualist, kind of like a techno spiritualist. Like, he was a mathematician, he was an astrophysicist, but he also believed in spirituality, and he wanted to try to kind of bridge the gap between these two. So he started studying the movements of the heavens and planets, and generated an entire mapping of every frequency in the range of human hearing, and mathematically related to the movements of the planets. So then I started reading this book. I was like, well, this is cool, but how do I just make a button so I can play them? Because I want to, like, tune my guitar to them. I want to do all this stuff. I want to play with these frequencies as if they were music. Because in my mind, it's like, well, if this is, produces some type of harmonic or spiritual energy, or changes your spiritual energy, then I'd like to be able to experiment with it. And there was no such application. There are some sound producers and things that I found since then that'll produce these sounds, but at the time there really wasn't anything like that in an app. I mean, it was 2016. There was very little out there that was going to allow me to just, like, hit buttons and play. So I decided to invent a machine, and that machine being, let's say, virtual machine. I created a piece of code that allows you to manipulate all these frequencies and catalogs all of these things from the cosmic octave. So that's how all this stuff started. I just wanted to make something for myself to hit a button and be like, ooh, that's kind of cool. Let me listen to that for a while. Or let me chant and, like, tune my voice to that. Or let me play it really loudly and let the kind of vibrations from a speaker flow over my body. And so then it just kind of ballooned from there. I think we go into brainwave frequencies and binaural tones and light frequencies. I mean, it just kept going further and further, down this rabbit hole.
I have a question for you that may seem banal, but I know that we have listeners that that don't necessarily have the same kind of experience that we have in the mystic world. I've noticed that you're very deliberately saying octave, and I also know that as a musician, you probably know that in music it's pronounced octave. Is there a difference between an octave and an octave, or is it?
No, I'm just pronouncing it incorrectly.
Okay, just checking.
I'm just pronouncing it incorrectly. Octave or octave. I just happen to pronounce it that way. I don't know. Maybe my Kentucky roots coming out. Bad pronunciation.
I love that, though. That's perfect. One of the things that I'm finding fascinating about you is that you go from talking about a book that I know contains trigonometry, which for me is like, woo, to the spiritual part of it. And that's fascinating to me to listen to some of the things you're saying that are so intensely mathematic. And then when you say, I want to push a button because it's cool, I love that. That's just so awesome to me, because so many times when we're talking mystic type things, it's hard to quantify something. And to me, this falls into the mystic category, because it does talk about how we move our frequency through our chakras and things like that, which are really basically a thing that is holistic or mystic, or however a person wants to qualify it. So do you feel like some of these things that you have looked at and learned out with frequencies, like we talked about with yoga, do you feel like this balances you, or you can access a different part of who you are, like it sounds like you are when you're speaking?
I think, yeah. I mean, the thing that I've been doing for the past 5 years, since I'm not only, kind of inventing and tweaking the technology, is experimenting with it. What after creating this thing, right? Create this machine that can do the things that I want it to do. The next question is, well, what the heck do I do with it? So how do you use a cosmic frequency? And I've done quite a bit. I think what I've created has helped me musically. I write a lot of stuff on the guitar and sing and tune my voice, to, or kind of attune my voice to these specific frequencies, which are not on the typical musical scale. So when I play music, and I tune my guitars, I'm looking for a sound that you've never heard before. And I play something, and some of the songs I've written, people actually have been like, what is that? Like, what are you doing? Because you hear the same. It's like if you heard only a song in G your whole life, someone comes along and plays like an A minor, you're like, oh my God, your mind would just blow, right? So it's like hearing a thing that is correct. You don't know why, and it's unique, and you want to hear more of it. That's the first thing I did. And as I started doing that, I was like, well, these tones are fairly powerful. And I try to work with them, chant. I mean, I'm doing vibrational speaker work now. I don't have all the answers, I guess. The answer to your question is yes. I think they do have not just mystical properties, but potentially psychologically healing properties, potentially physically healing properties. I believe they do, but I don't have them all. I don't have it worked out. I've noticed that people that work with it and use them for various reasons can induce different type of mental states, whether kind of like, let's say, hypersentient state, like hyper aware, high vibrational setting, like the crown chakra kind of thing, intuition, third eye movement or sight, or something as simple as just calming down and relaxing.
I've also heard how these frequencies could be used kind of to counteract the frequencies out, that we encounter out in our world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things that I started to realize after working with these is that pre-industrial revolution, everything that happened in the world was tuned to the movement of the earth, because that's all we've got, right? We've got the sun spins around its own axis. That's when we get light and dark. It rotates around the sun, which was why we get winter and summer and the seasons. And everything is kind of attuned to this natural cycle: light, dark, hot, cold, depending on how far you live away from the equator. And you just kind of get synced in this rhythm. All of life is synced into that because that's where we live. Now, the Industrial Revolution was the first time when we were able to create movement that is completely counter to the harmonious movement of the earth that we're standing on. And that means that now, if we look at like a combustion engine, we're burning dead dinosaurs and just churning up as much power as fast as possible. We want as much power as we can to go as fast as possible, not harmoniously, but just fast. And that's the same with electricity cars. I mean, basically, we're generating power, and that power is not in sync with anything. We're generating light, and that light's not in sync with the light of the moon and the sun. So that's where it began. That's where this kind of idea of like, that's why when a car drives by and the muffler's falling off, it just grates your nerves, man. It's not harmonious. It's like, it's just really annoying. So I think what I started looking into cell phone frequencies and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth frequencies. And if you actually octave them down, excuse me. I'm just joking with you. So like if you octave them down, right, we move them into the range of human hearing. I do this experiment sometimes, this kind of demonstration, where the first thing I do is I play them just the tone of the earth, really gentle, really nice and healing. You're like, oh, that sounds nice. And then I play on the cell phone frequency in the range of human hearing, and people are just like, the one girl started crying. Like if I play it really loud, it sounds like it's just shrill and shrieking. So what I started to look at is that we're being just penetrated with these frequencies all the time. And yes, cosmic frequencies are going through the earth constantly. Radio frequencies that don't have anything to do with our creation are kind of penetrating our bodies. But I mean, we're generating these frequencies all the time. We're generating extremely unnatural frequencies to get as much data through the air as possible and send it to our devices, right? And so that's just passing through us all the time. And that's just never going to stop. So the theory is, if you go out in the woods and you just sit there and meditate, or you go on a hike, no cell phones, no cell towers, no 5G, no 4G, nothing. You're just out there in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly you start feeling pretty good. Most people start feeling like a few days of that, you're feeling really happy for no good reason, right? And so my theory is that you're kind of just getting away from all these things that are slowly kind of irritating your mental state. So now we can't live without the technology. We're not going any back, unless you want to move into a cabin in the middle of nowhere, like the Unabomber, right? It didn't work for him. It didn't seem to work for him, but I think he actually did have a sensitivity to high frequency sounds, and he did write about being just horribly upset by planes going by, and that's why he wanted to take out technology, because he probably was very sensitive to these radio frequencies. That's all another story. But the point is, how do we retune the body? How do you take a guitar and you tune the pegs and you put it into tune and it stays there for a while? Like, it doesn't go out of tune. So I think the idea behind these frequencies is it retunes your body energy, it retunes your mental state, and you're a lot more, let's say, you have a lot more resistance. You're a lot more resistant to these kind of chaotic and unnatural, non-harmonious frequencies that are constantly passing through you.
So with this program you've got in the app, do you recommend people listen to it at certain intervals, or do they do the whole cycle through, or what? Do you have any kind of recommendation for that, for the different types of things people are dealing with?
Yeah, I think the problem now with the app as it stands is that it's very confusing. Like I said, it's a machine. It's not really an app, and it was a machine I created for myself. So there's a tremendous level of complexity in it. So what I am currently doing is I'm kind of not dumbing down, but let's say targeting specific programs. You're going to download programs. You'll have a few that are just free, and then there'll be some will end up monetizing these. And you'll download like Calm, or Psychic Energy, and it'll be a program that'll do a sweep from high to low. So right now, what I'm recommending is the lower chakra, like the root chakra, which is tuning the Earth's movement around its own axis. That's energy. So I always say power, love, wisdom. Those are the 3 points. Those are 3 ways the Earth moves. The most powerful, harmonious frequencies, because we're standing on the Earth, are the root chakra, the heart chakra, and the crown. And that corresponds to the spin of the Earth, the movement of the Earth around the sun, and then the wobble every 26,000 years. I think the Earth makes a slow circle. It's called the Great Year. So for mental stuff, mental clarity, visions, wisdom, crown chakra, and you can just hit it on the app and you can listen to it with headphones. And for kind of energy, like in the morning, think about digital caffeine, that root chakra, man, I'll wake you right up. And then before bed, I'd say heart chakra is kind of like a nice calming, like kind of digital Xanax, I guess is what I like to call it.
Nice, thank you.
So I saw in the app that it says to use, actually, let me not make it up and just quote it.
First time you open it, it's going to say, hey, it's a good idea to use headphones.
Yeah, and it says Bluetooth. But I also know, I've heard you say that Bluetooth might not be the best choice. My question is actually this: I don't have headphones that plug into my phone. I do have Bluetooth, and of course I have the speakerphone. Is it better to use Bluetooth, or is it better to use the speakerphone, or is it better for me to just spend the damn money and get headphones that'll plug into my phone?
Well, you don't want to use the speaker on your phone, because it won't be able to produce the frequencies. That they're too low. So generally speaking, that you won't even be able to hear it, and it won't really do much. I would just use any type of speakers, fine. I mean, I would say don't ever use Bluetooth speakers, because you're literally sticking a thing on your head right next to your brain, passing tremendously high frequency radio waves right through your brain. I'm guilty. Sometimes I'm at work and I stick my Bluetooth ones on, but I actually have kind of like yours, like noise canceling headphones, and I actually have an audio cable, and that's what I always use. I think it's best to get some with an audio input, because if you're going to use headphones a lot, and I do often at work or if I'm at home doing stuff, I like to have a direct audio connection. I mean, you're still getting EMF frequencies, but way lower than those Bluetooth things just going right through your brain.
Okay.
So it's best not to use Bluetooth head speakers, but everybody does. I mean, here's the thing: we don't know how long the Bluetooth speaker's been around.
Yeah.
5 years, and we're saying they're perfectly safe. I'm not saying that you're going to go crazy, but I mean, the story I always like to tell is Nikola Tesla. Favorite story is that he had these giant Tesla coils sending like hundreds of thousands of volts through the air, and you could see the energy just crackling. And he would sit in between them. Ted, you've probably seen this picture, right? He's sitting there reading a book, and he would do these demonstrations saying it's perfectly safe, right? These are so high frequency, they're passing harmlessly through my body, right? And Nikola Tesla died writing love poems to a pigeon, and he was broke because he tore up the patent for alternate current. So I'm just saying, to me, it's like, yeah, it looks safe, but what happens in 30 years? You know, I don't want to. I don't want to write.
We don't want to be writing love poems to pigeons. I mean,
maybe he was onto something. I'm just saying that his end was not. I mean, he seemed to be not the man he was, and I'm pretty sure it's because he was sending 70,000 volts of electricity through his brain, and he thought it was harmless, and I don't think it was in the long run. You know, so I'd like to keep as much of my brain power as I can later in life. So I would say that about Bluetooth speakers. Like, we don't know. We can see cell phones are really, you know, if you
it's funny you say that, because I rarely hold a cell phone to my head. Usually I use
one does.
It's usually I use speakerphone, because I have the fear of not fear. I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, or, you know, I don't think there's 5G in the vaccines or anything like that. But like, I do have this, like, that's a whole lot of humming and buzzing right up next to my ear that I don't know what that is. Let's keep it out here, you know?
I mean, it's just irritating, and there's probably a really good reason it's irritating. Can I put that phone up? I'm just like, I can't do this. I just speakerphone, never, only if it's like, you know, I'm in a crowded place, and I try to get off that as fast as possible. I think it's just naturally irritating because it's creating radiation that's just, and it's picking up those cell signals. And it's probably, if you look at MRIs, people are using cell phones, I mean, or there are scans that can show you how much, you know, heat and radiation is going into the side of your head.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think it's just, we're just naturally adverse to it. So I always say, yeah, it's way better to use a regular audio jack. It's just a little metal thing. It's insulated wire. It's safer, I think. I mean, like I said, I'm not, you know, not a radiologist, so I'm not a medical doctor, but it can't be bad to use fairly tried and proven technology versus, you know, radio wave frequencies.
Yeah.
I mean, you're walking a room, it's bouncing all off your skull anyway. I'm not saying that it's not going to, I think that there's a reason why when you get away from all that stuff, you feel better.
Sure.
Well, and we may as well mitigate what we can, right? I mean,
yeah. I think when I go total digital detox, you know, even if it's 2 or 3 days and I don't even know where my phone is for a while, man, it feels so good. You just feel so like natural. There's kind of, I think there is kind of an irritant. And if it's just an irritant, you know, that's one less thing. If you can get rid of some of it, that's one less thing to irritate you in a world that seems to be constantly trying your anxiety and patience. Yeah, and the whole thing about the digital harmony is that we're trying to kind of create your own little electromagnetic shield against that.
So tell us more about the specifically the frequencies of each of the planets, because you were saying, you know, that like there's a frequency for how each of the planet revolves around the sun, I believe.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's just take the Earth because it's the one we're standing on. And I find those to be like, when you hear those tones or you're playing them, or you sit there and someone puts the vibrational speakers on you, there's a difference between the tone that's harmonious with the Earth's movement and one that's not. You just feel it. I mean, it's kind of subjective, I would say, but it's definitely something you're like, oh, what is that? Like, you just notice it. And sometimes you'll find that the walls will start shaking or the air will vibrate heavier with this specific frequency. And the reason is, so the Earth rotates in 3 different ways, right? It spins on its own axis. And that is how we measure time. I mean, that it's 1 day, it's 24 hours, and an hour, you know, we break an hour is 60 minutes, and we break all of these things into fractions, and it's completely based, all of our clocks are based on the movement of the Earth around its own axis. And, you know, that is the basis of all time. So everything we know in life is based on that movement. And we know it has an absolute frequency. I mean, obviously, it rotates around its own axis once a day. It's one time a day because that's how we measure the day. But I mean, it's where we are in relationship to specific stars. So we can basically navigate. So here we are here. Once it makes 100% revolution, that is, you know, what we call 1 day. So we can measure that in certain terms of time, and then we can multiply that up into the range of human hearing, right? And that becomes one of the 24th or 25th octave of the Earth day. So that's what I mean with Earth movement. So it spins, and we say, okay, once a day it comes around, right? And we can break that into 2 60 minutes, and we say, how many times a second does that happen, right? So I don't have the math in front of me, but so if we say it's once a day, there's 24 hours in a day, there's 60 minutes in every hour, and we come all the way down. You keep multiplying down till you get to the second, because a hertz is a second, and hertz is how we measure the frequency. So so how many times a second does the Earth revolve around its own axis? Well, it's like a fraction, right? It's very fractional. So we keep moving that up, doubling it. So the law of octave is the double. If I keep doubling it, right, the sine curve is in harmony. I mean, this gets into trigonometry. Like I said, you guys don't get that deep in the woods, but you play music, you play guitar, you know that one note and another note, you're like, that's a G. That's the same note. But I know it's the same note. I can hear it. Those two notes, even though they are different frequencies, one is a power of 2 of the first one. So that's how we find the specific frequency. And it's really a range of octaves of frequencies.
So if you're talking about it from a musical perspective, you're talking middle C, you go an octave up, you know the next C is still a C. You go an octave down, you know the next C is still a C.
Exactly. So if you're playing music, so this is they call it the music of the spheres, would be like kind of the music of the movements of the planets are similarly mathematically related to the music of notes on a guitar.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and I mean that's what I call it, the cosmic octave, because the music that's being played is slightly different. It's not perfect like a guitar would be, because we're tuning to things that are actually imperfect heavenly bodies. But yeah, it's exactly like that. You can hear it on the app. You just play it, and it's very similar. It's just a few ticks differently.
It makes me wonder, and this may be far out in left field, but it does make me wonder, like, how much of the I can't remember if you called them cosmic octaves, but how much of those have we changed by messing around on other planets, you know, and just changing things up on like Mars and Mercury, and not Mercury, but Saturn and the moon, frankly, our moon, our Earth's moon.
Well, the interesting thing is, astronomically, they're all changing. Like if you look, the moon's slowly going away from us. You know, the Earth's rotation, actually, they just measured, most of the measurements lately have shown a significant speed up, which is crazy. I think it was they redid the measurements, and it was different than the last, like, very finely tuned measurements. I mean, it's so small you wouldn't notice it. We won't notice it, but I mean, the fact that these are bodies that have been put into motion. Like if you click marbles, you know, against a glass wall or a steel wall, they're going to bounce around, and they're going to move around, and at some point they're going to stop. So, or change trajectory. So I guess the point is that the planets are always slowly moving. It's just the time frames are so small. We don't know. So I don't think that anything we're doing to the planets is going to change anything. One of the interesting things that I found, and this was something that I didn't expect to find. So I asked I'm in touch with quite a few of Hans Cousteau's students, and they all speak German. So I got to translate everything into German, and they're all very, very Norbert. Fritz Dobringer is his main student, and I talked to him fairly often when I was building the app. So Norbert is someone he sent me to, and Norbert's been writing an entire symphony of the solar system for like 10,000 years, and he's been like doing the symphony for quite a while. And I don't know if I'll try to find a few guys. He played me like a few clips. It was pretty cool. But the thing is that when he said it, I said, well, and this is going to get a little bit into trigonometry. So the Earth, if I pick the perfect frequency the Earth rotates around the sun, right? It's a number. Let's just call it a number. You know, number X year. It's called a number year. So that's the amount. But the Earth moves around in an ellipse, right? It doesn't move around in a perfect circle.
Right. It's not like the Harlem Globetrotters spinning a ball. Right.
Right. The Earth rotates around the Earth. I mean, so the Earth rotates around the sun, and it speeds up in some places and it slows down others. It's on an ellipse. It's not a really super crazy ellipse like some planets that are aligned these really long ovals, but it speeds up in some places and slows down. So I started saying, well, wait a minute, you can't give me a single note if it's not moving at the same speed all the time. And this is just a mathematical thing about trigonometry. But he said, no, first of all, if you just take the frequency it starts and ends, it always happens with that same frequency However, it just speeds up and slows down on certain parts. But I said, well, could I just recreate the tone the Earth makes? Because it would be there would be a frequency offset of the frequency. And I said, I don't want to get too much in the weeds in mathematics because it gets very dense. But what he said is like, no, you can't do that because every planet, as it approaches the Earth and goes away on its own orbit, influences that specific sound that you're trying to make would change with the planets getting closer or further away from. And I suddenly realized that's astrology.
Yeah.
That's a scientific explanation of astrology. And he didn't mean it that way. He didn't believe in astrology. But I suddenly realized, okay, if the harmony, right, if I'm trying to sync with the natural harmony of the Earth in some form or fashion, but it changes, right? It changes slightly. It would be like a tone slightly going up and down. But how do I know what that sounds like? It was like, well, it sounds differently. It changes the natural frequency and harmony of the Earth as other planets get closer to it because of the gravitational pull.
Also, if they're changing, even if it's imperceptibly to us, will ultimately the frequencies change? I mean, maybe not in our lifetimes, but will that be the case?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, they'll alter and shift. So I mean, the idea is that everything's mutable, right? But they're within a certain range. So if I say, okay, well, if I literally do the trigonometry of the ellipse of the Earth and there weren't other planets affecting it, and I figured out exactly what frequency it was making at any given point, the sound it would be making, it would change like, you know, one degree, maybe 136.1, it would be 138. But if you play that out over time, it would just sound like a note that was slightly shifting. It would actually sound kind of like a human voice. Now it's some AI tech would be, I think I might be able to produce that at some point.
Interesting. And how much of a change does it take for us to actually register it?
Oh, about 1 hertz. You can definitely tell. Like if you're a musician and you play guitar, one of those strings is off, you'd be like, ooh, that one, that doesn't sound right. Right. So if you're telling, we can tell half hertz. So you probably heard of 432 hertz as the A. So 440 is concert pitch. No one really knows when we changed it from 432 hertz to 440. It's a whole conspiracy theory with the Nazis. I don't even know. At some point, someone just said, okay, 440, my violin goes to 440. So that's what we're doing. And everybody changed it, right? But 432 is only 8 centigrades. So it's like 8, you know, I think centigrades, the single digit of a hertz down, right? It's 8 hertz down, but it makes a big difference. Like it wouldn't be in tune. Like if you play something that had an A to 432 and someone was playing an A that was 440, you would know. It would sound awful.
Yeah, it's like that experiment. I can't remember where I saw it. It was years ago, but that experiment where they start 2 violins and they're very off key from each other. And, you know, you have the wah, 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 wah.
Right.
And as it slowly gets closer and closer together, as soon as the question for the audience is, as soon as they're in harmony, raise your hand, right? And you can actually go like a full 3 minutes from when the first person raises their hand to when the last person raises their hand, depending on their hearing, of course, but also their proficiency with music.
Right. Yeah, you can just get what you're hearing is called an interference pattern. So, and that actually, my app does that. So that's the basis of binaural tones. And I don't know if you've heard of that. If you listen one ear and the other ear, your brain will hear the difference between these two that are a lower frequency than your ears can register, but your brain will hear what's called an interference pattern, like 3 hertz. And that's where brain waves generally like somewhere between 1 hertz to I think 30, something like that. Those are all the brainwave hertz. And we can't hear that. We couldn't hear 2 hertz, right? But your brain can interpolate 2 hertz if you have 432 and 434. If there's a 2 hertz difference on either side, you'll hear a wave. And this is the basis of the second part of my app, which is doing interference patterns. We can actually change that to sweep your brainwaves from one state into another.
So before we go to the interference patterns, I have one more question. I don't know if Andrea has any other questions. I'm actually excited to go to interference patterns, but how does actual physical hearing loss affect hearing these frequencies and having the benefit of the frequencies?
Well, I think the good news is that the frequency doesn't have to be sound. It's really cool that I'm able to create vibration. So you can create vibration with sound, correct? So I can say, okay, well, I'm going to play this speaker really loud. I'm going to stick it on your chest and you'll feel it vibrating your body. But there's a new technology called bone conduction speakers. And so bone conduction speakers basically just turn electromagnetic signals, which would normally go to a speaker, which would pump air, that would generate sound that our ears would hear. It just pumps like your bone. So it actually vibrates your bone and you can hear these vibrations on your chest. So if you were deaf, you could still benefit from this. You would just have to get bone conduction. You get a bone conduction headset and suddenly you hear. Yeah, that's crazy. The bone conduction speakers are amazing. People are actually able to hear now that are deaf.
Yeah, my son-in-law is working on a system that he's building that conduction, that vibrational speaker into a seating surface. And it's really interesting to watch that and feel it, and where I am on the seating surface will make a difference on my experience. And that's really cool. When we were talking about the sounds and reaching same hertz, I was thinking about my junior high school clarinet experience, where I was definitely reaching a different vibration than a lot of people. And it just made me laugh because I was thinking about when you were talking the violins. I remember the first few days of clarinet in school going, nope, none of us were anywhere near close. That probably wasn't medical though, or beneficial, and our poor parents.
It's the basis of music. I mean, why do you think we listen to music so much? And these are also I'm using frequency, but they can also be rhythm structures. I'm very bad at rhythm. I mean, I play guitar. I'm like a melody guy, you know. So, but I have friends that are beat guys, and they're like, "Well, what's the beat structure?" I'm like, "Well, there is. I mean, there's an entire beat structure, and I kind of embedded it into the app with a metronome, so I'll play." But I need a little more work in my rhythm, you know. I'm more, definitely like a melody structure guy. But I'd love to work with someone who could really take some of the rhythmic patterns, because every single frequency that matches a cosmic frequency also has a rhythmic structure. Because it's just
wild.
so many beats. Yeah, so many beats to time. So I've been trying to kind of plan for that in the future. I mean, it's been a lot of work. Now I've been working.
That.
Yeah, I went from the pure tones to the binaural tones, which are the offset patterns, and then into the brain waves and different brainwave frequencies, and how can we generate those and kind of tune your brain waves into those patterns.
Well, I mean, along with the beat, I do sound baths.
Cool.
And we use drums, and we use Tibetan bowls, and we use bells and such. And it's interesting how a whole shift can occur in a group with the shift of the beat. And, you know, obviously there's sound as well. So there's the combination of the tone and the beat. And we often will do a guided meditation during a sound bath. And it's just interesting as I work with people and watch them shift through the experience. And, you know, it's so easy to see the change. And like you were talking about, Crystal, with the violin, sometimes different people will be doing different beats. What I've noticed though, when it's a drum, that's okay. The drums, we use the frame drums, so the skin covered frame drum. And people will still experience a positive thing, even though our beats may be different. They're experiencing it a different way. Our drums have different tones, and it's just interesting. I just find that whole thing fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, the crystal bowls, this works the same way as a crystal bowl. And actually, I was recently, I was teaching yoga at our corporate office. It was like a health and benefit day, and there was a woman who was doing sound bowls and like a sound bath, but she didn't show up. There were all these people lined up to do it, and I'm sitting there, and I played the bowls. So I put my app on. So I put on a specific brainwave pattern and kind of put it on low, and put the lower the octave down, so it was a real bass sound, and it's kind of like this wavy sound in the background. And then I played the bowls on top of it, and it worked really well. And so it's the next product I'm going to be building is called Portable Sound Bath. It's not a recording of a sound bath. It's like a very specifically tuned sound bath, and you can choose your different like programs. You know, like Wake Up, Third Eye Attunement, Lucid Dream, something like that. I'm going to be naming them. Then you can download them, but they'll actually play procedurally like a program. Yeah, and I mean everything we can get it. I can keep getting deeper into the math because I've been working on the mathematics for a while to sync everything. So the brainwave frequency for each chakra is slightly different. It's still in the same range that like a beta or an alpha or a gamma or delta or theta, all these different brainwaves. But I've tuned them mathematically to be mathematically related. Usually an octave if I can, but a fifth if I can't choose the octave.
Well, I'm just grateful there's folks like you with a math brain that
Yeah.
can think about all this, and I'll just get to benefit from it.
Yeah,
I don't want to bore anyone with math. I mean, it's.
I'm sure there are people out there that would love to get way deep into the weeds of math with you.
What I'm hoping is eventually it just works. It's demonstrable that it works, and it's not something that you're like, how does the math work? You know, I mean, you could just say, okay, what's the difference between somebody just playing this on a guitar or someone just playing this note or playing all these different related frequencies together, you know, with your system. So I'm developing the system once everything is synced, and we're pretty much about there. I think the math is all dialed in as well as I can do it without actually starting to throw in some, you know, really experimental stuff. But that's just where I am. I rarely benefit from my apps. I need someone to like turn my brain off for a minute and just, you know, sit down with it. And speaking of sound math, so one of the reasons why people were bringing me into this Mystic Detectives podcast is because I was at a kind of a spiritual event called Hidden Oasis. And so I've got a galvanized cold plunge tub and these vibrational speakers. And my girlfriend was in there. She's like, what? She was in there doing the cold plunge. She's like, what if you put your speaker on this thing? So we put them on the sides and it vibrates. Galvanized steel actually generates, it's hardened, so it generates crystals. And that just makes the tub a little more resonant than like a wooden one would be, only because you know they kind of all go in the same grain, and it's just rings. It's like an instrument, so it's like I call it the literal sound bath, and the water starts just rippling around you, and turning the sound into physical patterns.
That's awesome. And now, so is being cold important, or could some of us who enjoy warmer water?
Oh no, we're doing warmer water. I can't say no one can sit in like cold water in the middle of winter and enjoy a soothing sound. The thing is, you can't do it in a jacuzzi because it's like multi-layered. It has to be a single like metallic surface. Because you know, if you ring a gong, like basically a galvanized tub is like a gong, like it rings, and so you put that vibrational speaker on it, and the whole thing just starts singing. It's like you're getting into a singing bowl, literally. It's like you made a singing bowl big enough that you could get into and pour water into. That's what a galvanized tub is. So I'm gonna order like a heater. So you put it in there and heat it up, and then probably take it out so you don't burn or electrocute somebody. That's my biggest fear. I don't want to like stick anything into outlets and stick it onto a galvanized steel tub. You can only heat that water by putting a submersible heater in there, or there's like a camp heater where it's like a camp shower with a pump. I've used one of those before. I just don't happen to have one at the moment. And then there's a tankless water heater you could do it with as well.
Yeah, I had a galvanized tub that we were using as a hot tub, and it had one of those on-demand water heaters. But then it had to be refilled each time, so it wasn't a circulating heater. It was a take the water out and put more water in heater.
Oh yeah, and I've set up several jacuzzis in the backyard, and I have it next to the cold plunge, so it's kind of nice to jump back and forth. And I've got some external heaters for those. You can get a gas-powered camp heater. They're pretty cool because they use like a 12-volt battery pump, and then you get it's like a tank, and it sucks the water. It's a pump, sucks the water out, and the gas heats it. It literally is just like just turning a gas flame. It's like having a grill, like a gas grill, propane grill, and you just have a propane tank. I mean, it looks a little low class. It looks about as classy as an above the ground pool, but it actually works pretty well.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I can see how it would be poor form to electrocute your guests, though. So I'm glad you're working on it.
I'm working on finding a non-corded version of this, and I'm slowly working. This was like totally new. We just kind of came up with it, and people started using it, and word of mouth got around. And I thought there'd be like 5 people doing a cold plunge, and I had like 85 people. I had to cut them off. I just said no, because I had to hold these onto the side, and my arms were getting tired. And it was just like every person I had to sit there for 5 minutes. And so now I'm building one where they're just going to attach to it, and you can just push a button. And there's tons of applications. And the problem is it gets a little too big. So I'm trying to now dial it into like streams of application, like literal sound bath, portable sound bath, and then the next one's going to be virtual sound bath. It'll be in VR, and you'll have lights and things that will accompany it.
That's wonderful. Well, this is a great idea. I really love it. And I'll have to be flying back. I'm in Washington, so I'd have to be flying back to Utah to enjoy it.
Yeah. I mean, schedule some time and we'll do some samples. Maybe we can just do like some Audible samples, because we didn't get time to do like demos and things, from an Audible standpoint. It'd be great to actually do some demonstrations.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. We definitely get to have a phase 2 discussion for this.
Yeah, let's do some demos.
Yeah, do you want to take 5 minutes and talk about, I think you called it interruptive frequencies? So interference. There we go. Yes, yes. Thank you.
An interference pattern is a thing, and this is why when you hear two things that are slightly off sync, you hear the wave. If you're a musician, you'll be like, "Oh, that's not in tune." People are like, "How do you know it's in tune?" It's like, I can hear the wave. They're not like perfectly synced. So the idea of an interference pattern is you have two patterns that are pretty close to each other will form a third pattern that is the difference between those two. And so this is okay. So you got noise canceling headphones. It will create the frequency that cancels out the frequency coming in. So it actually can hear frequencies coming in, and then it just puts like a pattern behind it that fills in the humps. So if you look at it like a sine curve, anything that fills in the gaps, or let's say there's peaks and valleys, anything where there's a peak and there's a valley and there's a valley and there's a peak, that cancels out one sound and another. So
wait, so you're saying in order to fill those in, I'm really hearing something else that I'm not registering?
Yeah, it's kind of like generating the noise canceling by filling in the sound that's coming from ambient sources. Wow. So in an interference pattern, so if you ever do binaural stuff, you put on like you'll have 2 tones and they'll be slightly off by like 2 or 3 hertz, and you'll hear this third pattern in between your head, and that's just your brain interpreting one and the other. And you cannot hear 3 hertz, like that's below the range of human hearing. But if you hear something that's if you hear something that's like 60 hertz and 63 hertz, you'll hear 3 hertz. You'll hear the wave. You'll just feel it. And now if you have vibrational speakers, and I put them on the side of that of the galvanized tub, you'll feel it move through your body.
Would it feel jarring, or would I just feel the difference?
You just feel the difference. I mean, it's jarring if it's like 150 hertz. You won't be able to feel that. It's like somewhere between 0 and 30 hertz is the only, you really can't hear it. Past that, it just sounds like 2 totally different tones. It's very jarring if I ramp up the difference. If I go from 0, and I've got my new version of the app has programmable ramps. So I can say, okay, I'm going to start here and I'm going to end here. I'm going to start at a low frequency brainwave pattern, which is like I'm sleeping, like a resting. Low frequency, your brainwaves are moving at about like 2 hertz. And then I ramp it up slowly to about 20 hertz. That's jarring. It can be jarring in a good way if it's a nice steady ramp and you're like, man, I'm really tired, I need some energy. Now, if I just like turn that frequency, turn the interference pattern slowly up, and what I do is I keep one at like say 100 hertz, and I just slowly tune the other one up to 130 hertz over time, your brain will start getting really excited because your brain waves will start sweeping towards that state. So now that's when we're really able to alter your brain wave state, alter your state. So the movement of the electromagnetic frequencies inside your brain, we can change. And that's like just science. We can actually, there's plenty of research showing that changing or sweeping from one low state to a high state or high state to a low state can change your mental state. So, and we don't really, there's a lot of work being done on that. And you can talk, I can get into a lot of research by Itzhak Bentov. Bentov was, he's passed away now, but he was an Israeli, he was a spiritualist, and he invented medical devices. He was a master of frequency and pattern. He did a lot of experiments with how you can match your breathing and your circulation patterns to the Schumann resonance, and create. He believed you could actually create psychic powers out of this. I'm not going to say that yet. I haven't developed any telekinesis yet, so I'm not going to say that I can develop psychic powers. The CIA took his research and did a whole lot of very secretive work. And there's a lot of work, if you guys give me time for next conversation, I can dig some of this up. And the CIA took him very seriously, and they believed that he was able to promote like remote viewing and things. And then you guys, this is Mystic Detectives, right? So I mean, obviously, there's a connection between the CIA's experiments in psychic abilities, remote viewing, and Itzhak Bentov's work in frequencies and being able to match. And this is kind of where I put these two things together. Being able to match your body's and your circulatory patterns frequency with the natural Schumann resonance, which is kind of like the electromagnetic pulse of the earth, could generate a tremendous amount of psychic power. That's his.
Wow.
It's interesting to me because we have on our podcast interviewed quite a few people with psychic powers, and I know both Crystal and I have a variety of things that we feel we have gifts in, and it would be fascinating to watch how this influences or magnifies the things that we may already have.
Yeah, and I've done several. So I take his technique, which is where you actually hold, it's breath holding. So when you're not breathing, your heart rate and your circulation actually does sink, or when you're barely breathing, when you're not interfering with the electromagnetic movement of your body through just your muscles firing. So when you're breathing very shallowly, like when you're in a deep transcendental meditative state, or you're not breathing at all, right? Your circulation will sync itself to the Schumann resonance. And that's actually a scientific fact. It's like 7 cycles per second, which is half, which is an octave of the Schumann resonance, which is 14.2. So anyway, that's what he's saying. Is like when you get in that state, your psychic powers actually dramatically expand because you're working in harmony. And we haven't talked about harmonic resonance yet, but the whole point is that if you're resonating at the same frequency as something else that's generating vibrations, it'll double the amplitude of the power. This is why when people sing together, it creates more volume. Two people singing at the same frequency creates a tremendous amount of volume. And that's like if someone jumps on the trampoline and you're jumping and they jump
at the right moment. Right.
And what happens when they jump at the wrong moment? You're just like, they're creating a wave. There's two people creating the wave, and that doubles the power.
Wow.
Yeah, I like I said, all this stuff is really cool, but how do I marry these two things? We've got spiritual energy and power, psychic energy and power, and we've got physical electromagnetic energy and power. And I'm certain these things are connected. And I think that we just kind of lost our connection between the two.
Yeah, I just don't know how they couldn't be, honestly.
Yeah, they seem to work pretty similarly.
Synchronously.
Yeah, synchronously. And one of them is measurable by instruments we have, and one of them is not. And I think the subjectiveness of psychic phenomena and psychic power and experiences is what makes it so hard to measure, because there is a subjectiveness. I mean, astral projections, and I think it was, who wrote the book Journeys Out of the Body? Robert Monroe, one of my favorite, because he was a radio engineer. And I read his stuff long ago. He was actually experimenting with binaural tones when they were new, and no one had ever heard of this. And he developed the ability to journey out of his body to astral project. And he was a scientist. He had no idea if I was going crazy. And the whole book, Journey Out of the Body, is about him. Like, he just found the perfect key and binaural tones to just snap him right out of the body. And he wrote 3 books and formed the Monroe Institute, which has been using binaural sounds to induce astral projection for 30, 40 years, maybe more, since the 50s or 60s.
Wow.
So all this is related. So I'm trying to, I have always felt like all of these things are very, very much related. And I don't have any answers as to, like, there's no result yet that you're going to, have an out of body experience because you listen to this app, but, there's potentially a key to developing or enhancing psychic abilities through these types of technologies, or through recreating, which are kind of like natural harmonies.
Yeah. So tell our listeners where they can find your app.
Right now on the App Store, Audible-Acupuncture, and Google Play. I am working on updating the Google version. I've got to go back and look. I'm constantly doing updates. You can download it on the App Store. You can go to quantumactivation.com, and it should be there, quantum-activation. That's my new website that's out there. There are links to the apps on that site, and there'll be some more stuff happening. But eventually, in the next year or so, I plan to release Portable Sound Bath, which will be a little bit more kind of targeted. It'll be a little bit less confusing. There's a lot of features and things, and it's now gotten a little out of control. It's become like a whole, just explaining it takes 90 minutes for you guys, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I don't want you guys to think about the math. I just want you to use it and say, wow, this is cool. I'm going to hit this button and it'll just run a 5-minute program or 1-minute program. And then you'll kind of get this like digital prescription for some type of spiritual energy altered state.
Nice. Well, lucky for you, I am absolutely willing not to think about the math.
Yeah, don't think about the math. I got to think about it all the time. I got to wake up.
No problem. I got you. Well, this was so fascinating. Do you have any other questions, Crystal?
No, I agree though. It was very, very fascinating. And I'm excited to do a follow-up for sure.
Yeah, let's do some demos because I think without
for sure.
context, I'm just talking about squiggles and math and things. Let's do some actual audible demos, some visual demos. It'd be great to actually show this stuff, in action.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for your time. And our listeners can find more about us at mysticdetectives@gmail.com. They can send us messages or share experiences that they have with frequencies or other things that they find fascinating. And we invite you to stay curious
And keep exploring.